Happy Sunday, folks. This week I'm in Minden, Louisiana. In particularly, I'm at Beaver Dam Campgrounds, which is in the Kisatchie National Forest, just outside of Minden. Minden, Louisiana is just off I-20. It's between Shreveport and Monroe, Louisiana, and I guess you call it the northwestern part of the state. It's a very heavily wooded, lots of pines, but the campground itself sits on a really pretty lake. But that's really not the purpose of this week's video. When I got here, when I was looking at the map as I was coming through, I noticed a little dot and it said Germantown Colony Museum. And it just happened to be just up the road from where the campsite was, so hey, I decided to check it out. Very interesting story. You'll get a little bit of it from the video, but here's the background on it. A group of Germans came to this part of Louisiana back in the 1830s. Their purpose was to found a utopian group or utopian settlement. It was based on religious ideals. The idea was that they would create the perfect Christian community and that they would follow those rules while they waited for the rapture. This is something that went on a lot in the early, mid, late 19th century, and it created what is probably a few well-known names. The Shakers were part of that ideal, different ways of doing it, but basic same idea. Also, if anybody has ever tried to go buy things as a wedding present or receive them, the name Oneida might be a little bit familiar. Also, amazingly enough, Amana. These names were from the Pennsylvania area, the settlers up there, the Utopian colonies. Also, I'm sure everybody has heard the name Pennsylvania Dutch. I'm not sure everybody might not understand is that the Pennsylvania Dutch weren't really Dutch. They were Germans. It was an outgrowth of Deutsch, which is the German word for Germany. But I don't want to get too far into it. But basically, Germantown was one of these colonies. It was one of the more successful ones, too. It lasted for about 40 years. And not only that, some of the descendants are still in this area. As a matter of fact, the lady that gave me the tour is married to one of them, and her parents, her in-laws, father-in-law and uncle-in-law, I believe is the way she put it, actually still own the land that is adjacent to that where the museum is. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Here goes a little trip into, yes, Germantown, Louisiana. Germantown was founded by Count von Leon, or Bernard Müller. He was a very religious man, a Mason, but he had fled his hometown of Germany to try to find, much like a lot of folks did back in the early days of the country, to try to find someplace where they could practice their religion and live in peace and harmony without persecution. Unfortunately, Count von Leon didn't see the full culmination of it because he died of yellow fever in the trek down from the Pennsylvania area, tie into Pennsylvania Deutsch. But his wife, the Contessa, or Countess von Leon, came on with, some guesses are about 60 of their followers, came to this area of Louisiana and founded this colony, this Harmonist colony, and which is now Germantown. There are still relations, or still descendants of those original folks living here in the area. The museum is on about an acre of land, and it has many of the original buildings that have been reconstructed or preserved. including the house that is right here behind me. This is the house of the Countess von Leon. And we've got a smokehouse, another cabin, the blacksmith shop, and several other smaller outbuildings. If you'll remember when we were at Fort Richardson, I talked about how the soldiers would put in and then remove the chinking between the logs in their barracks, depending on the season. They'd take it out to allow for airflow, and then they would put it back in going into the wintertime to keep the cold air out. Well, what we're looking at right here, and I want to point it out right back here, is that instead of having chinking, they leave it open. I'll get it over here where hopefully you can see it. And they just have boards, but the boards are latched into place. You see right there, so they can take them out and allow for airflow during the summertime, but latch them in. I just kind of thought that was kind of neat. I'm in the blacksmith shop. One of the ways that the colony helped to sustain itself, like a lot of smaller settlements in the area, was they had a general store. The women would make clothing. They actually had brought silkworms with them, so they made silk clothing. They grew cotton, but they would make clothing for the inhabitants of the colony, but they would also make extra, and they would sell to the folks in the area to help make extra money. They also did work making tools and such in the blacksmith shop, same kind of thing. They would make what they needed, and then they would put the rest of them in the store. And the men, in addition to doing the blacksmith work, they would also make furniture. So they would, the tools, they were self-sufficient, that they could make the tools in the blacksmith shop, use those tools to make furniture, sell that furniture, and the money would help to support them. Oh, here's a fun one for you. There's a pear tree right in the middle of the museum, and they actually encourage visitors to grab a pear when they're fresh. I got me one. Juicy, very good. I'm in the museum proper. What you see before you is a layout of how the village is put together, and this is how it would have looked at the time of the Countess Leon and her group. In the bottom of this showcase are several books, including Bibles, religious texts, and even down here a manuscript of, sorry, I'm having trouble getting it focused there, a manuscript of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Some of these, they're in all sorts of different languages. The inhabitants of the colony spoke and wrote in 6 languages. And like I mentioned, they were a very religious group, so obviously several things would be of religious importance, one of which is this crown that was worn by the Count Bernard von Leon when he performed religious ceremonies. Some relics from the colony itself that have survived. More books. The books that I showed earlier along with this collection in this tub down here. They were found underneath the floors of one of the buildings, one of the houses when they were taking them down to reconstruct them. Captured here and brought in to preserve, but almost lost. I'm in the central kitchen. This area was used by the women of the colony, and they rotated either weekly, monthly. Patricia, the wonderful lady that walked me through this, was not real sure, but they would do all the cooking in here for everybody in the whole village. A group would come in, a group of women would come in, they'd spend some time, and then another group would come in and do it. But it's got pretty much all the normal accoutrements that you might expect in a kitchen of the time, from the big cast iron stove, although can you imagine cooking for 60 people on a stove like that? But tables and chairs and all the types of things that they would have used to cook for them and to feed. Just had to show a picture of the herb garden. Unfortunately for me anyhow, but I have never in my life been able to grow rosemary. Obviously these folks are pretty successful at it.